Back again with another YouTube video. It's your boy Uriah G. Today we're gonna react to the album that never had a chance, Michael Jackson's Invincible. Let's get right into the video.
Michael Jackson has always tried to get ahead of the curve and expand his music. He dominated the 80s decade with one of the greatest album trilogies of all time with the help of legendary music producer Quincy Jones. Then in the 90s, Jackson ditched Jones and went a completely different direction sonically, bringing more funk and aggressiveness.
Yeah, that new Jack swing. And I can say, before we actually get into the vid, Dangerous is my favorite Michael album. If you guys see my older content, when I discuss Michael Jackson content, like I have a video called What's My Favorite Michael Album? And I said Dangerous because it's a different sound. It got a lot of hits on it. It got like some of my favorite songs on it. The new Jack Swing sound is different. So yeah, let's get right into the vid.
To his music, all while continuing to sell records and dominate the charts. But what would the 2000s hold for Michael Jackson? Had the king of pop finally run out of steam? At this point, Michael had been in the music industry since 1969. What more did he have left to prove? That he was still invincible.
You Rock My World, that's my favorite MJ song.
Invincible would be the sixth studio album to come from Jackson since he ditched the little kid persona and started making music on his own in 1979, and would be the final album released before his death in 2009. The story of this record goes far beyond the actual album release and really starts before.
And this album has a lot of like backlash, less promotion behind it, cause Sony and stuff. So
the turn of the millennium. This album costed a ridiculous $30 million to make, making it by far
it's the most expensivest album. Yup.
The most expensive album ever made. You might be wondering, how the hell can you even spend $30 million on one album? Most people don't even sniff that type of money in their lifetime. Well, by the end of this video, it'll make a lot more sense. Michael Jackson had taken a step back from releasing music in the 90s, but that didn't mean he was out of the limelight. Jackson was still in the peak of his fame. In fact, a few years after Invincible released, Michael rented out an entire grocery store so he could just go food shopping like a regular person. So many things were happening in Jackson's personal and public life around this time that the focus had shifted away from the music. It was time to go back home, show the world one more time why Michael Jackson was the king of pop. Just 5 days after the end of the History Tour, Jackson was back in the studio recording and making music for his next studio album. By the time Invincible actually released in 2001, Michael Jackson hadn't released a new studio album since 1995, so this was essentially viewed.
Dang. Cause you have you got Dangerous. I don't want to say the year because I don't want to be wrong. But if we look at MJ's discography, let me play this.
As a comeback album, and he would get all the help he needed and more in order to fulfill his vision. You see, Michael was always trying to find the latest sound in music. He spent countless hours in the 90s seeking out the latest trends and sounds in the music landscape in order to evolve as an artist. This was also around the time.
Yeah, he must be talking about the History album and stuff like that. Because Dangerous is 91, so
digital recording took off, and Jackson wanted to take advantage of the new trends and innovations in the music industry. Now, he could record as many takes as he wanted, so he fell down a rabbit hole of perfection. So around this time, Jackson wanted to tap into the late 90s and early 2000s style of R&B, the current sound at the time. He brought.
No, I did not know that. The perfection was different than it used to be with Michael, and him having to do a lot of takes and him having to change his sound. You guys tell me in the comments down below about the backstory of the Invincible album, like some other stuff.
brought in many different musicians, producers, photo shoots, and rented out a total of 10 different studios across the country at a time, which brought
Dang.
Jackson's tab to over $30 million for the making of Invincible, which,
So that's probably why the whole thing came up to 30 mil with the album being expensive.
adjusted for inflation, that's $53 million. One of the downsides of bringing so many people into the album making process is that Jackson wasn't as involved in the actual writing process. Although he does have writing credits on a majority of the songs, there's speculation and rumors about how much Jackson actually contributed to the writing. Dr. Freeze, no, not him, was a producer who worked with Michael from 1998 until the singer's death, and he had a huge hand in the production behind this album, most notably on the track Break of Dawn, but he also gave Jackson demos for other tracks such as Heaven Can Wait. Just like his last album History, Jackson would once again work with hip-hop artists like Biggie, who's posthumously featured on the track Unbreakable. Invincible is by far Jackson's most experimental album, using different
And underrated.
production sounds and styles to round out an adventure into the new millennia. This album also features the one song where Michael uses his real, deeper voice. Have a listen. But what makes any album special or obsolete are the actual songs. So what kind of tracks did Michael give
You guys, you think I should check that song out? I ain't never like sat down and listened to that song.
us on this project? As I mentioned before, this album has early 2000s pop written all over it, and it works better on some songs rather than others, and while I don't think this album is a prisoner to it, you can definitely tell. There are 3 songs on this album I want to highlight that I believe are the best out of the entire track list. This 3-track run right here is one of the most
You Rock My World, man. Yeah, I remember, man. When they dropped the Michael movie, because you know it's supposed to be 2 parts, that's what they're saying. But when they do the movie, I hope they put the 2001 performance, the You Rock My World, or at least the music video or something.
underrated runs in Michael's entire career. And that's saying a lot. I believe this shows flashes of the old Michael from the 80s and the early 90s and the new sound that Jackson so desperately wanted to chase. Now, although I believe this is one of the more underrated songs in MJ's catalog, you might have already heard this track if you've been online over the past couple years. This song trended on TikTok for a little while back, but it's definitely more deserving than a short-lived trend. It's one of those songs that kinda only works if your name is Michael Jackson, like Girlfriend from Off the Wall. I don't think this would be a good song if another artist recorded on it. There's just something about Jackson's voice and ability to create unique landscapes and soundscapes that just makes this song work. The song itself is about Michael not wanting to leave this earth without the love of his life, saying he's not ready to depart and leave his love alone, hence the title, Heaven Can Wait. The lead single for Invincible, You Rock My World, served as one last glimpse of Jackson dominating the charts, as the track was the last top 10 hit he released during his lifetime.
Top 10, man. That song was goated.
Besides an unnecessary skit at the beginning that goes on for way too long, this is another fantastic Michael Jackson song in a catalog full of timeless classics. Another love ballad, this song sees Jackson not only reflecting on his age, but wanting to settle down with the subject of the track, an unnamed woman. Songs like these prove that Michael Jackson
And the choreography is really smooth.
still had a lot left in the tank, even after so many decades spent in the record-making industry. Released as a promotional single, Butterflies is reminiscent of something on the back half of Off the Wall, for example, while giving us that smooth and slow-paced early 2000s production that Jackson sought out for Invincible. In my opinion, this track has the best chorus out of all the tracks on Invincible, and it's one of the high points of the album. Upon release, Invincible sold 363,000 units first week and debuted number 1 on the Billboard charts. And for quite literally any other artist, this would be a fantastic and phenomenal achievement, but for Michael Jackson standards, it was seen as kinda weak. Now, keep this in mind, when MJ was at his peak, Bad was seen as a disappointment in the sales department because it couldn't match Thriller, the best-selling album of all time.
Dude, same thing with Dangerous.
So I take these disappointments with a grain of salt, because 360,000 units first week is still an impressive achievement. Reviews at the time were mixed to say the least, but the album has gained a lot more positive recognition as time has gone by. But the album was still seen as a flop at the time due to the low numbers after release. What was even more perplexing was the lack of promotion for the album by both Michael and his label Sony Records. Why did neither party want to promote an album for one of the biggest artists ever? The answer is money. Jackson and Sony clashed for most of the 90s over the rights to MJ's songs. Michael expected by 2000 for the masters for his previous albums to revert back to him. But Sony had different plans, and this upset Michael greatly, and he wanted out. This conflict was happening right.
Yeah, because 2001 was the year where MJ and Sony had their stuff, and the label situation. So that's why MJ he just didn't trust a lot of people after this stuff.
Right around the period for Invincible, so when Michael told Sony and its CEO, Tommy Mottola, they cut all planned promotion and projects for the album. And to make things even more complicated was that Jackson's lawyer, John Branca, worked for Sony, which Michael didn't know about. Just as a little side note, it might not be a coincidence that in 2009, when Jackson passed away, his own catalog, which he desperately wanted to keep, and the Beatles catalog, which he owned, were sold to Sony. But when Sony cut promotion for Invincible, Michael became infuriated. He issued a public statement in which he blasted Mottola. Have a look for yourself.
This is very important because throughout the years, black artists have been taken advantage of completely. And it's time now that we have to put a stop to this incredible, incredible injustice. And like Mrs. Sharpton was saying, people from James Brown to Sammy Davis Jr., some of the real pioneers that inspired me to be the entertainer that I am. These artists are always on tour because if they stopped touring, they would totally go broken. And
Yeah, because touring, if you guys don't know, is the main way these artists get paid. It's not really the streams, because streams you only get what, like a penny to like 11 cents, 5 cents to 11 cents off a song. Yeah, it can add up as a mainstream artist to like $1 million or 100,000, depending on how much you sell or copies and stuff. But back then, selling actual CD copies was how the artist was getting paid. But now, these artists are mostly getting paid through touring and I guess merch, but I think it's mostly touring.
And record companies really, really do conspire against their artists. They steal, they cheat, they do whatever they can, especially the black artists. Sony, Tommy Mottola. Tommy Mottola is the president of the record division. He is a mean, he's a racist.
Yeah, I heard about this, but I'm seeing a full-on in-depth of this, so now that we're hearing this.
And he's very, very, very devilish.
In the end, Michael refused to tour for the album, and Sony didn't renew their contract. So Invincible's
He had to tour for this album. Man, and I don't know if he wanted to tour, because, you know, his later on in his life, he didn't like touring. So
marketing was really over.
He wanted to be more with his family
before it even started. All in all, Invincible is a solid album. I would go as far as to call it good, even great. For almost any other artist, this album would be considered a success, but for the king of pop, it wasn't the comeback that Michael or Sony had in mind. Sony certainly didn't think so, because we know how that ended. Despite the expectations for the time, Invincible has aged quite well, with people in the modern day looking back and seeing the vision that Michael once had. Do I think it's
There's even a rap feature up there, so it's like, yeah.
on par with the bar that Jackson set in the 80s? No, but I don't think it's fair to compare his later albums to that of Thriller or even Bad. Michael Jackson spent his entire career trying to top Thriller, and he did as good of a job as anyone could with Bad. That constant desire to top the greatest album of all time
Yeah, because Bad is like his number 2 biggest.
did give us some great music. It's just unfair to compare. Take Invincible for what it is, and I promise you'll enjoy it. Thank you all for taking the time.
Alright, that was the album Never Had a Chance, Michael Jackson's Invincible. Subscribe, like, comment. Tell me what you guys want to see next in the comments down below. I got more videos coming. Stay tuned. And yeah, Uriah out.